Welcome to Season 8 of Radio Free 501c, brought to you by Rogue Tulips Consulting. Don't forget to subscribe or follow us. We're in Season 8 and we still have a lot to talk about. Radio Free 501c is supported by USAE News, the weekly community newspaper of Association CVBs and hotels. Learn more at usaenews.com. As we near the end of April, I am pleased to welcome a first-time guest, Vishal Shah. He's the CEO and co-founder of Element AMS, and we're here to discuss two of my favorite topics, the art of war and technology. It's Monday, April 20th, 2026. Welcome to episode 325. Can you believe April is almost over already, too? The first quarter flew by. It's so hard to believe 2026 is happening so fast, but it is. So hopefully spring's treating you well. And if you have seasonal allergies like me, I hope they're not bothering you too much. We're here today to talk about one of my favorite topics, technology and the art of war. And you might say, well, you've never combined those two before, Cecilia. Well, actually, today is a first to bring those two together, and as a perfect first episode topic for a first-time guest, Vishal Shah, who's here with us today to share his thoughts on that. But before we dive into the conversation and learn more about Vishal, I want to thank you all for taking some of your time this week to listen to Radio Free 501c, brought to you by my company, Rogue Tulips Consulting, and our podcast partner, USAE News. You can learn more about USAE News on their website, usaenews.com. So get yourself a subscription. We want to thank USAE News for providing a complimentary subscription to all our podcast guests this year. So thank you, USAE. And speaking of subscriptions, if you haven't subscribed to Radio Free 501c yet, take a moment and do that. We are well past 300 episodes, and there's lots of conversations happening, so you don't want to miss any of them. So as I mentioned, we have a first-time guest this week, Vishal Shah. He's going to talk with me about technology and the art of war. But before we do that, Vishal, welcome to the show. Would you like to say hello and tell us a little about yourself?
Hey, thank you, Cecilia. It's my pleasure to be here, and I really appreciate for you to give me this opportunity to speak with you and just in general with the audience. As a quick background, I've done engineering as my education, and I come from a technology background all along. And I've gone through various stages of serving technology, right from banking to the government and now to the associations. And I've been in the space for over a decade now, and it's been joyful. If I would say, joyful in the sense it's just been fun working with people. This is a space where you feel like there's family and there's camaraderie, and everybody's wanting to do something in general good for society, and it just feels joyful to be part of this space.
Oh, I love that. That's so wonderful to hear somebody describe something as joyful. I think technology does a lot for us, despite some of the current challenges today. And I think when we think of technology challenges, we're most likely thinking about artificial intelligence right now, in addition to the usual list of things like, does the technology talk to each other? How can we make sure our technology talks to each other? So we also wanted to blend in the art of war. That's also one of your favorite books, as we learned when we first met. What is it about the art of war that you find interesting or fascinating?
It's a great question, Cecilia, and the word war typically gets people into, hey, there's a fight and there is something to be captured, and there's a lot of that in the book of how do you defeat your enemy, kind of a story. But if we step back and just take a 36,000 feet view, what it actually also tries to talk about is look within yourself, and how are you organizing yourself for achieving a goal, right? And if we bring technology in this perspective, like the one word that really stuck in the book with me was the concept of moral law, right? And what the moral law was calling out was, hey, if you do something, you do that consistently, irrespective of who is involved at the other end of like, it's not your favorite employee or not your favorite customer or someone who's not your favorite, right? And to be able to define that for yourself really ensures that you are clear on the path that you are on, right? And that is the holistic way. If I had to take something for myself from that book, outside of battles and victories, is how do you reflect on how are you navigating the journey of whatever goal you want to achieve? And so, if to summarize at a technology level, say if like we are building an EMS right now and we are trying to have an impact for the associations in the format that we want them to be successful and find value and have an impact, right? And so, if we are not organized within, have everything thought through of how we want to achieve the end goal, we would never make that. And that's what I really enjoyed in that treatise as I was reading the book.
And I think that's a really great observation about moral law. And it doesn't matter who you're dealing with, especially with my interest in ethics. I think that's really important because ethics have to be applied equally to everyone, no matter who you're dealing with. And it's one of the things I realized that I was really a grown up the day I could treat somebody I didn't like fairly, because it's very easy to let our personal opinions color our decision making. So that's interesting. What I've always taken away from the art of war, though, is the search for opportunities,
Mm,
because that is to me the biggest lesson, especially as it applies to nonprofit organizations. We always need to be looking for those opportunities. And we're the art of war with moral law and opportunities and technology, where those all come together, is all the things technology can do for us that are positive, at least in my opinion. If you want to push back and say, no, you're absolutely wrong, that's okay too. But that's kind of how I look at it.
no, it's funny, coincidental, not funny. It's coincidental of how you just mentioned about opportunities because just the other day I was listening to the podcast where this podcaster is interviewing celebrities, people in high positions in the government, and he was sharing what is the one thing that he like one or two things that he observed that these people in these positions do. And obviously one was very simple that we all know, execution, like make quick decisions, right? And that's something that is covered in art of war as well, is like, you can't linger in a limbo of, hey, what am I going to do? Even if it's going to be wrong, make a decision, run with it, and you'll get feedback of where you're going to land, and then know not to do that again. But the other thing, which is where opportunities come in, and that's where that talk connects with this also, is all of these people are focused, hyper focused on the obvious that nobody's looking at, right? And it's basically finding an opportunity, which is something that we can quickly do. It is obvious. It's just that we are so stuck, like you talk about AI a little bit earlier, like, we are so stuck in trying to find a fancy new approach of doing X, but I'm still doing all my work in Excel, say, for example, right? Hey, how does a system work with Excel while I'm doing everything fancy out here, right? And so, no matter how amazing features I add in an AMS, if my staff is continuing to just work in an Excel spreadsheet, then how do I solve that, right? And that's where it's an obvious aspect that nobody's trying to look at, that we should really think of and finding opportunities of achieving the next goal. So I agree with you on that thought process of the opportunities.
Yeah. And I think that also kind of builds into the concept of our systems all talking to each other, all the different pieces, because like you mentioned Excel. That is probably my favorite software program because I use it for everything. I recently had eye surgery, and I have this very complex eye drop schedule. So I'm like, oh, let me just make an Excel chart. Can just mark everything off as I'm going along. So, and I love Excel because it does many different things with the data, and you can import, export different things. And I think that when we're looking at those opportunities, how can we integrate this? I recently saw, for example, at ASAE in a Collaborate community, people talking about using Dropbox and Microsoft 365 and how are people integrating things. And it turned into this really fascinating thread about who uses what, how they use it, the challenges they have found trying to integrate all the stuff. And I'm just going to call it stuff because there's all kinds of stuff out there.
Right.
There's more and more AI tools being developed, or they're getting more powerful. I was just recently reading a new story about Anthropic and how they've come up with, I think it's called Claude Mythos, and it's
Yeah.
supposed to be the most powerful AI tool so far. And it actually can do things without being told to do it. And I find that fascinating and frightening at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I've caught up with that thread of Dropbox and Teams. It's a very like, people are sharing. First of all, if I take a step back, that is a great resource. Collaborate is an amazing resource where I feel like there's so much to learn because all of these organizations are doing so many amazing things. And you just can't get to everything out there, right? But coming to what you're talking of AI and cloud mythos in general, there is this topic in Art of War, which is called as patience.
Mhm.
And so it's it's important. Like what I've observed in general is sometimes it's better to be observant and be patient and see of how things are unfolding versus like think of an outcome before even it's arrived, right? Like we as human beings are terrible in prediction in general. And yes, we may know in general, is everybody going to use AI in the future? Absolutely, there's no doubt about it. But how that AI is going to be utilized, how is going to change our lives, we can't really predict that because there are so many aspects of the technology decisions and adoption that are going to dictate how it's going to flourish. Because I feel like I've seen enough in the small career that I have. I cannot say enough. There's so many people who have seen much more than me. But say, for example, when I was like young and just starting working, and mobile apps was the biggest thing, right? And everybody was building companies for mobile apps. Now, yes, that was true. It had its big surge for 5 years. And then what happened? There were some apps that just stuck with you and it became the norm. But now it no longer was a fancy little thing that where everybody's building a new mobile app company. It was where the use case is applicable. Someone actually then implemented that mobile app. And some people, even today, don't have a mobile app for
Right.
themselves, right? And so thinking like, hey, this technology, in this case, AI is going to be all encompassing. Yes, that may be true, but I can't predict that. I have to be a good observant and be patient enough to see of how the trends are floating and drift along with it to
Mhm.
see where things land.
That's right. Well, and that's actually a great integration of one of the lessons from the Art of War of Patience. So thank you for that, because that's really the very first lesson I've pulled out of the Art of War when I started reading it years ago is you do have to be patient. Things don't happen quickly all the time. Sometimes we do have to react quickly, but we all know the old trope about nonprofit organizations, especially associations. They take a really long time to do anything. And it's the way we've built the system. And that relates to technology because technology is a system that we build, whether it works well or doesn't work well, or maybe it constantly needs tweaking. But governance is a system too. And so it's very similar to technology because if our governance system's failing, then our decision making is going to fail or we're going to take too long. One of the other lessons of the art of war that I like to share with people is you have to get there first. But if you're taking too long to get there, you're never going to be first. You're always going to be like fourth or fifth or maybe 10th. You never know. And so there is no perfect data. And I think you can agree with that as a technology expert, Vishal. There is no perfect data. There's no perfect time. We can only act on what we know, and we have to act.
Well, I, I kind of in not full agreement with getting there first philosophy.
Mhm.
It really depends actually. The context matters on
Right.
how you're defining getting there first, right? Um, whoever is like, at least in technology that I can think of, whoever is getting there first is is going on a path of tremendous experimentation, which also means a lot of failures along the way of what outcomes you're trying to achieve, right? And there are not many people who can actually walk that path, because you actually even get burnt out trying to get there first, right? Because in order to get there, like, I'm sure everybody knows the iron triangle. You have money, resources, and time, right? Probably time. And at any given time, you only have two of those available to you, right? So if somebody has the money and resources, they definitely don't have time, or they're trying to negotiate time, right? And so depending on who has what and what is the context, getting there first changes. But also, I feel like we all we all try to follow this philosophy that life is a race, but actually
Mhm.
it's not, right? Like I probably would get there to death sooner than anybody else, right? And so how is my timeline compared to somebody else's? I just don't know that, right? And so
Mhm.
what is important from the philosophy of getting there first is constant experimentation and identifying what's not working, and then stop doing that, right? And so I feel like at a micro level, getting there first is applicable, because you want to quickly keep just experimenting and say, hey, this is not working, this is not working, this is not working. But at a larger goal level, it really depends on how you're defining the concept of getting there first.
Mhm. That's well, and the thing, all excellent points again. And I like it when people don't always agree 100% because it makes for more interesting conversation. But you're right about getting there first. It's not always best. For example, I don't consider myself an early adopter of technology. I kind of hang back, let it go through a generation, maybe two. I might check it out. I might experiment with it. I talk about Google Gemini a lot. I was a beta user of Google Bard, which was the first iteration of Google Gemini. So I use it quite a lot, but I kind of consider myself not an early adopter. But then a couple months ago, I was having a conversation with my friend Sandra Nam over at Kiko, and she started laughing when I said I wasn't an early adopter. And she said, Cecilia, you're always like trying everything. When we put a new tool out there, you're always like experimenting and trying things. And I was like, oh, I guess I never thought of myself as an early adopter because I tend to be cautious about it. But the other problem about getting there first is you might get there first and then all of a sudden you're overrun by everybody who sees that you got there. And now they're like, oh, well, there's a there. I'm going to go over there too. And the next thing you know, you're over, everybody's like crowding you out or running ahead of you or something, and this is like, and this is like in the tech field, it's always very competitive, but it's like, using my company as an example, we were one of the first companies to offer an ethics course when that requirement came in for CAE renewal. And now it's like there's a lot of people doing it, so like we were there, but now the field's become very crowded. So how do we break out of that field and move ahead? And that's where it's like why, really the big lesson of Art of War is looking for opportunities, because you always have to find that next opportunity where you can move into a different space or make that space look different because you're bringing a new perspective or a new experience to that space. I don't know. What do you think about that, Vishal?
Just as you're saying that, I was um I was thinking about a chapter in the book. I forget where it came up. It's like, how are you, like, actually the book also has this whole thought process, like how do you put yourself in a position that you're thinking outside the box, right? Like how are you how are you thinking in a way that the customer feels like you are lagging behind, right? Or the competitors feeling like you're lagging behind, but you're actually way ahead, and they're just taken by surprise, right? And that's like literally, as you're speaking, I was like reminded of that text in the book, and I don't remember the exact the context that they had. But you're right in that format that we I actually lost track because I was thinking about trying to recollect the text in the book. But
Mhm.
it's really important for us to be exposed in aspects of perspectives such that we have a new idea that
Mhm.
originates and gets us from A to B sooner than we had previously anticipated, right? And so it's really important um, from that perspective. How can we think of a different angle to that result so that we get there sooner? So that's what came up in my mind as you're speaking about the
Mhm.
topic.
Yeah, getting well, and yeah, getting there sooner is not a bad approach as opposed to first. Kind of let somebody else test the water. Like, well, you go first. No, not me. Sort of like I don't know if you remember that old Life cereal commercial where the two little boys didn't want to try the Life cereal because they said, "Oh, it's supposed to be good for you." Oh, we know. We'll let Mikey try it, their younger brother, and he liked it. So they let him go there first, and he liked it. And then they're like, "Oh, well, now we're going to eat the cereal." So it's sort of like that, I guess. I don't know. Maybe that's not totally relevant, but trying to get there sooner as opposed to first is really not a bad strategy. And that's a lot of what the art of war is about. And that's a lot of what good technology implementation is about is that strategy of when are we going to get there and how soon do we need to get there. I'm sure, and of course we don't share horror stories necessarily on Radio Free 501c, but I'm sure, like myself, you have seen some tech implementation gone wrong. So, like when it's implemented too quickly or the data is not cleaned before it's exported into the new system. So that could have that, having that let's take our time approach in that situation might be a better way to do it.
Actually, I'll take a very different example to what you're calling out. I actually went through not depression, but kind of a depression. Like I read this book on OpenAI, and as I was reading the book and how OpenAI came to what it is today, not as a company, but as a technology, right? Like remove OpenAI, just think of how AI evolved to what it is today.
Oh.
I was like deeply touched and impacted when I actually stopped using AI. Like I felt like I had the burden of all these people who were impacted to train the models, and I just detested the whole thought of using AI as much. And I went through almost a period of 2 or 3 months where that was not my first thought, right? And as I was observing what was happening in the industry with how AI is being adopted, how everybody, OpenClaw came up, Google came up with Nano Banana, Anthropic came out with its own models, and all of those started evolving. And and then of course I got back to starting using AI and being more mindful of how I'm trying to use it, or even try to ignore what I had learned, because at any time, any technology has some amount of impact and disruption that is not a direct known. In some cases, there is a known. So, what I learned from that is, in my experience, it was exciting of using AI and how I could, like, I started building all these applications that I could not do, and I could supercharge my work. And then I read this book. I stopped doing whatever I was doing. And what happened, what the applications that I had built, right, for various reasons became stale. And then when I tried to pick them up, I could no longer use them, right? But the tools that I started seeing and observing of where the trend was going, because the models are also releasing new LLMs every few weeks, right? And so the models are also getting intelligent enough of how they would work. And then I saw a pattern of where the big gap is of trying to build these applications using AI, as well as trying to make sure that they consistently work over a period of time, right? And so, what I learned in that experience of, yes, I quickly experimented. I I was successful. Then I observed it failed. I withdrew myself from it completely, and that allowed somehow allowed my mind to think through and sift through and not not be stuck in that race that, hey, if I don't get there first, somebody else is going to get there first. But then also, all these other players had enough time to see the feedback that they were getting of where this is failing, and they didn't walk that path, which allowed them to position their products better of, hey, here's where we are better for your this workflow, right? So that is where I learned that aspect of technology for myself. It failed for me in some format, but then when I gave it enough time, I was able to find a path where it would make me successful.
So it's almost like you took a break from it, like
Absolutely. I
like a big,
literally, Cecilia, I was, I felt depressed. Like, not, I was not in depression, but I just felt depressed because of how it came through, and I just withdrew myself from using it.
wow. So yeah, well, and I think sometimes because we talk so much about depression and people being depressed, and which is good because we should talk about that. I think sometimes we overlook the fact that sometimes we're just sad, and things can just make us sad. Like, well, I'm sad that this is going this way or not going this way, whatever the case may be, or sad over a loss. So and I think when we're looking at a technology like artificial intelligence, that a lot of people are rabble rousing and saying it's going to kill us all, or that it's going to take our jobs. Well, that's probably really not, because you're seeing people now starting to use it, I think, more thoughtfully than anything else. They're not abandoning it. It's like you kind of took a break from it and said, let me take a step back for a while. And then you came back and had a different, fresh perspective on it. I think that's what most of us end up doing. Although I did see in the news last week that somebody tried to throw a Molotov cocktail at the CEO of Anthropic, and they think his motivation was to stop AI. And so we have this extremism about the topic too. So I think most of us are kind of more moderate in the middle types, like I just use it for very specific things. Like and like I often say, and people are like probably tired of me saying it, but I prefer Google Gemini over all the other AI tools. I use it the most. I think it's the most useful. But I also don't ask it questions like, how many US senators violate your hate speech rules, because it came back with a very biased answer, and that made the news. And it's like, well, why are you asking AI that? Maybe you need to just go check their voting records. So, hopefully some of these news stories are making us more thoughtful, because that's a lot and you've mentioned this earlier in our conversation, of the art of war, being thoughtful about what we're doing, what our moves are going to be, and how we're approaching things.
Yeah, and as you're talking about it, the art of war doesn't have, or maybe I don't recollect exactly it if it touched this topic, but there's a great book, Sapiens. I don't know if you read that, but in that book, there's this one example. Again, this is all thinking that this would have happened, right? But there's this one example where he identifies of when humans started settling, right? And they started settling when they identified wheat. And what happened with the identification of wheat was they realized that, hey, we no longer need to hunt for food anymore. And they just kept consuming wheat. But because of wheat consumption, all of these other challenges started happening for the health reasons. Like, hey, you just can't consume wheat all the time, right? And so what happened was, like, about 4 or 5 decades later, they identified, hey, we have to mix more things. We just can't consume wheat because it has its impact. And so the lesson that I learned from that, which is applicable to all technology in general, is you have to recognize that technology that comes, like, usually just stays. How it is being used is then improvised as we mature with that thought process of the technology. So I see no reason why development of AI or advancement of AI would stop, because we just continue to build better machines, better technology. That's history has told us that. So how is it not going to happen going further?
And that's really interesting. I haven't read that book. I do know people started to settle when we started farming instead of hunting and foraging. But yeah, you can't eat just wheat. And I love that. You can't just use one technology and not update it or learn about what else is going on in the world. You might have a favorite, but you should check out the other ones once in a while. I do check out the other tools. I know there's a lot of people that love Chat GPT, for example. I've never been impressed with Chat GPT. I think it's too hard to program it. I think it's too hard to manage it. You really have to pay a lot of money to make it worthwhile. And so I always say to people, I think Chat GPT is the web crawler of AI tools. I think it's going to be the first one to go away. And I'm starting to hear people say, well, we're shifting away from it to Gemini or Claude or one of the other tools. I've tried Claude once or twice, but I've seen so many news articles about it getting hacked. Like I just saw like the fourth hack in like just in the last year. And I was like, oh, well, I probably want to stop that one for a while until they get their security higher. So, you kind of test drive things in a way too, but it's sort of like I wonder, and you wonder sometimes how long did it take people to figure out you can't eat just wheat? Because my husband and I have these conversations sometimes like, how do you think people figured out we could eat blueberries and not die? Or how do you think people figured out we could make cake out of milk and flour, and sugar? Well, we didn't have sugar, but fruit maybe. So how did people figure this stuff up? It's all trial and error in the end, I guess.
Making quick decisions and seeing if you succeed or not, right? It again, uh, there is this saying, I don't remember, I read in a book where they were saying, what's the difference between a great scientist and a good scientist? And it all aligns with the theme of the book as well. And a good scientist spends a good amount of time to make sure that they are in the right path and getting to the right outcome.
Mhm.
But what happens is because you want to make sure you're on the right path and getting good outcome, it just takes a long time.
Yeah.
Whereas a great scientist quickly identifies the small experiments that they can perform and see where the outcomes are and see, okay, this particular outcome is not working out, that outcome is working out. Figure out a lot of outcomes that did not work out. Now they have a clear picture. Hey, here's the path that I can go on. And they get to that very soon because they broke down the entire task into so many small micro tasks and figured out what was not working. And so that's exactly what we should be doing in technology in general is, hey, what is the simplest thing that I can quickly try and see what's not working with that experiment?
Mhm. And that's really a great example. Another book I haven't read. I love that example. But it sounds like a great scientist is willing to risk, first of all, which a lot of us are not, and they're also willing to risk being wrong and failing, which again, a lot of us don't want to do. So I think that's really a great example of that because, again, looking at technology, a lot of times we don't want to change our technology because there's a risk the new technology won't work. There's a risk people will be uncomfortable with it. There's a risk people will be angry or unhappy. So we don't want that. We want everything to stay smooth and calm. But the problem with that is if everything stays smooth and calm all the time, you're never going to get anywhere. It's like how people say friction is what makes things happen. It makes fire, right?
You touched on a very good topic. Friction is so important. Friction is important not for the sake of friction. Friction is important.
No.
Friction is important from the sake of trying to get a better outcome for everyone involved, right? And if you are not bringing those thought processes together, how? But the reason why people don't have as much friction is because we somehow are afraid of failure, right? And I think that's the thing which is connected to the risk taking that you're talking of. And even in art of war, like, there is even if you did everything, there is still a probability that you would not win the war, right? And so, like, no matter if you follow the book to the T, failure is still an outcome that is possible, right? And so, if you just step back and just recognize that we are failing all the time, and it's okay. Say, for example, right? I want to brush my teeth at 6:30 a.m. every day. Now, what is the percentage of time that I did that? And if I look back at the data point, some days I did at 6:40, some days I did at 6:20, some days I did at 7 a.m., right? Now, do you look at it as a failure point? Because you didn't brush your teeth at 6:30, right? And in one context, that is a failure point because the goal was not just brushing the teeth. If you did not start at that time, then the rest of your day is off schedule in some format, right? Uh, and so I feel like we need to re-look at the concept of failure and be okay with failures in the format that I need to find quick failure points because then I know I should not be going on X path. Now, of course, context is very important in all of these conversations, right? The context of failure. So there are some instances where you just cannot fail, right? So, for example, I'm building a rocket that's going to take human beings to space. Clearly, there's death on at some point, but I want to make sure that that is not the highest probability outcome.
Right. Yeah. Well, right. If we're going into space, we definitely cannot afford a failure on that. And it actually would set us back a long time. If anybody remembers what happened with the Challenger flight, and
Yeah,
that was horrible.
it was
And
sad.
so we took a step back for a long time because of that failure. But we have to risk or we don't know. I mean, the basic thing, like you said, which I think is an excellent point. Even if you follow every piece of advice and information in the art of war, you might still fail. It's a possible outcome. And that's what we have to plan for. And it's like when people talk about scenario planning, that's a lot of what we're looking at. What if things go wrong? That's the scenario we're planning. That's what we're looking at and what we're trying to be ready for. And I have to point out to the audience, and I don't know if you've ever looked at it this way, Vishal, but ultimately, I'm sorry, it's not Lao Tzu, sorry, wrong Tzu, Sun Tzu, Lao Tzu wrote the Tao Te Ching, which is my other favorite book. Sun Tzu ultimately failed because he was a general who was working for the government of Wu for that leader. And there was a lot of conflict in Asia at that time, and many different regional and city states that were in competition to be dominant. And Qin ended up becoming the dominant state in the
Mm,
end, despite everybody else's efforts, despite having a general as clever and focused as Sun Tzu. The state of Wu did not dominate. And that is why the major country in that part of Asia today is China,
mm.
because it started out as Qin. And so even ultimately, Sun Tzu had to accept the fact he was going to fail and that was a potential outcome. He did keep Wu safe and secure for a long time, but things things shift, as you've pointed out.
I did not know that. Good. Thank you for sharing that with me. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, I know it's kind of like a downer. I mean, I don't want us to wrap up. This has been a great conversation, and we're nearing that point where we do need to wrap up this conversation. But I'm hoping you'll be interested in coming back and talking about other topics.
Oh, of course. I would love to, Cecilia.
So, oh well, thank you. It's been a great conversation, and thank you for sharing some of your personal experiences as well. I think that in an age where everything's out there, it's nice to keep some things private, but to share our reactions or emotions. I'm pretty much out there most of the time. I mean, most people know what I think about anything, whatever they ask me. I'm pretty forthcoming with an opinion.
Yeah.
I do keep some things private, though. I think it's important. But I do think that this has been a great conversation. And the art of war still today, 5,000 years later, has a lot to teach us. And
Absolutely.
learning the history behind it, especially, okay, so one more thing about Asia in that era, it was very similar to the Greek experience in the ancient world with many city-states, and they were actually part of a hegemony, which is very similar to a confederation. So it's really fascinating the way we connect, the way we organize, the way we govern today, the competitions we have. They're really very much the same. They just have different names. We have different countries now. The names
You
have been
redefine
changed.
you redefine the context, and you'll find
Yeah,
all the connections.
that's right. Humans are humans, and we always seem to come out okay in the end, despite how difficult it can be at times. But I generally tend to be optimistic about stuff.
I agree
So
with you.
that's learning from history. If we look at our history, we're still here to talk about it. So that's a
Yeah.
good thing. So kind of ended on a more positive note. But Vishal, this has been great. I am so glad you accepted my invitation. And I like to ask my guests, what is the one thought you would like the audience to take away today? And how can they get in touch with you if they'd like to talk more about technology or the art of war?
Yeah, you can easily connect me with me on LinkedIn, or you can find me on AWSDC or ASAE. But the one thing that I think the most important 2 points are patience and be okay with failure is really important, because I think failure is connected to risk taking and actually taking risks, right? So you would not get to failure unless and until you took that risk and a chance and perform something, right? And so be open to be able to take those chances and run with them, recognizing that failure is an outcome, but that is not that end all be all. And then that's where patience comes in. Like, hey, be patient enough with all the risks that you're taking, because you are going to come across a lot of failures.
That's right. Oh, that's a great point. So thank you again.
Yeah.
Well, we have to go rogue for now, but we'll be back next time with another exciting conversation like this one. You never know what we're going to talk about here at Radio Free 501c, so tune in. You can also subscribe or follow us on your favorite service, so take a moment and do that. If you'd like to learn more about Rogue Tulips Consulting and how we can help your organization bloom outside the box, check out our website. You can see our consulting services on the services page. You can find this episode of the podcast featuring Vishal and share it with your friends and colleagues, and look at our past episodes and see what we've been talking about lately on the podcast page. You can look at our education page, especially if you're interested in our ethics course. Our spring session for CAE prep for the exam is closed now, but we'll be back in the fall with more courses. So check out the ethics schedule, and also check out our Lead Forward Initiative program, where we're featuring adaptive leadership, and check out that program. And if you'd like to know what's on my mind this week, which frankly, I never know what I'm going to talk about either, check out the blog page and see what's on my mind and what thoughts I'm sharing this week. So that's it for this week. And on behalf of Vishal and myself, we will see you next time. That's it for this week. I hope you really loved this episode as much as I did. Thanks for listening. Learn more about how our experience and knowledge at Rogue Tulips can give your organization the strategic edge to reach its goals. Check out our website at roguetulips.com. We'd love to talk with you and see how we can work together.